So I'm a historian, and what interests me is the impact of mass media on society, but also how to measure it. And sociologists know, and we know from them, that from about 1960 to maybe 1985 or so, it depends in the different countries of the industrialized West, there was a really fast value change. So if you look at gender norms or sexual norms or racial attitudes, there's a really fast shift. And that's a big difference from if you look at previous centuries or maybe the time before 1945. So what interested me is whether it was a coincidence that the time when television was really big and when it was an era of limited choice where everybody could only choose one or two channels and everybody was watching the same thing, and almost all people in society watched the same thing, or mostly the same thing, every evening and talked about it, whether television's impact basically facilitated and caused this value change to be so fast at that time. So that was what I was starting out with. And I also wanted to do this as a historian because there's media studies, of course, and many media studies scholars have given up on the question of the impact of media, and because they say it's simply impossible to measure, to prove that a particular medium and a message that this medium sends has something to do with what happens in society. So I wanted to challenge that and use news sources and find measurable, provable impact. Well, it's a comparative study. It studies the US, the UK, and Germany. And so there's a lot of findings that are different if you look at these countries, but there's also some overarching findings. One of the findings is that television indeed accelerated value change, particularly in the case of sexual norms and gender norms. So, for example, the spread of feminism or acceptance of gays. And it happened in all the three countries at the time. Another overarching finding is that television didn't create new norms. It kind of picked up some new ideas that were tried out in a vanguard, maybe a bohème or by very young people, and it then put them into mainstream genres such as the sitcom, which reached millions. But in the process of doing so, it de-radicalized these ideas. So it wasn't possible, for example, to talk about, for television, to talk about career women in very straightforward terms, but it was possible to talk about housewives who were starting part-time employment and to do that in a positive light. So we have this process of picking up new norms from the margins, mainstreaming them, but de-radicalizing them in the process, but also successfully really bringing them very fast to audiences which weren't easy to reach before television. So, for example, old people, rural folks, teenagers, children, apolitical people would be reached by television entertainment and in the decades before, they wouldn't so quickly have been reached by mass media. So the other big issue that the book is about is whether it's possible for television comedy to undermine racism, because we have a lot of sitcoms or comedies where you depict a racist anti-hero, such as Archie Bunker in the US at the time or Alf Garnett in the UK. This is an ongoing issue because many scientists have argued that there was an Archie Bunker effect, and that means if you depict a racist hero, then that will backfire and the audiences will actually become more racist and not less racist when they watch it. So I found that it really depends on the context, because in the US and in the UK and in West Germany at the time, it actually worked, and these comedies did help improve racial relations and kind of undermine racism. While in the UK, certain conditions weren't met, and there it actually backfired. And it also did embolden racists, while some of the mainstream audiences were actually critically discussing racism.